I'm here today with Michigan's longest-serving United States Senator and the chair of the Levin Center at Wayne State University Law School, Senator Carl Levin. My name is Jocelyn Benson, and I am the Dean of the Law School. And Senator Levin, let's talk about your early oversight experiences in the Senate. Now, your first oversight post was as chair of the Subcommittee on Oversight of Government Management. That lasted 2 years, from January 1979 until January 1981, when President Reagan was elected and the Senate majority changed to Republican hands. What were some of the key efforts that you addressed in those first 2 years when you were in the Senate?
Well, one of the first efforts that I really put my shoulder to was to get a procedure in place where members of Congress would be accountable and responsible to overturn bad regulations. Too often when I was on the city council in Detroit, we would go to our elected official and we'd say, this agency, federal agency, is doing terrible things, is doing something which is wasteful, it's doing something which is harmful to a citizen of my hometown of Detroit, and you should change this. And the answer I got too often was, that's the agency, you're going to have to go to the agency to get action on that. You know, go to some agency in Chicago and raise the issue with them. And I realized then that no, I want to be able to go to my elected official and get my elected official to override a bad regulation, which is wasteful or arrogant or stupid or foolish or whatever it is, or much too intrusive. For instance, on small business, there were regulations which didn't make any sense in terms of small business. And so when I got to Washington, one of the first things I did was to work with Dave Bourne, a dear friend of mine from Oklahoma, to pass a law which said that either house could veto, either the Senate or the House of Representatives could veto a regulation of an agency. It made elected officials accountable to the public for those regulations. We couldn't just pass the buck to the agency. We had the responsibility of looking at a regulation. Well, as it turned out, we got it passed, but the Supreme Court didn't like the process we put in place, and so we modified that process and came up with something which is still the law of the land, which gives the power to a few members of Congress to force a vote on repealing a bad regulation. And it's something that was one of the first things that I worked on when I got there, actually. A number of other things I worked on with Bill Cohen, for instance, a Republican from Maine. We worked on a oversight effort to make sure that when a contractor was disbarred from doing further work for the government because they didn't pay their taxes or they did something fraudulent, that the disbarment, the suspension of a contractor would go across the government, because we saw that what happened too often is that a contractor, a company, maybe was disbarred by one agency of the government, but then was still doing business with the other agency, even in the Defense Department. A contractor might be disbarred by the Army from providing material because they had done something wrong, but then they could go to the Air Force and continue their work. And so we were able to pass on a bipartisan basis, which is critical to getting anything passed that's useful, really, to get a government-wide disbarment in place.
So the idea of oversight, of government oversight, really drove not just your decision to run for Senate, but defined your time in those early years and throughout your time in the Senate. And in developing those bipartisan relationships to get things done on oversight, your relationship with Senator Cohen sticks out in particular. How did that relationship further and affect your oversight work?
Well, it just showed right off the bat that when you join with colleagues of both parties to correct a problem, that you've got a chance of correcting it. If your motive is to just make a partisan attack on the president or somebody else for partisan purposes, it's not going to have an impact on public policy. And Bill Cohen was one of those people who was willing, for instance, to take on some sacred cows of people in his own party, or people who were supporting his own party, by the way. And you have to be willing to do that. You have to, if you're going to do good oversight, you've got to be sure that you are willing to take on some people who may have been your own supporters or who are your own party members. Otherwise, it's not credible. You're not going to be able to get the support of the other party to do oversight if you exclude from your oversight people that you're close to. You've got to be able to include them in order to be credible. And that, as a matter of fact, to give you one example, in the Government Affairs Committee, when Fred Thompson, a Republican senator from Tennessee, was chairman of it, he wanted to do a big investigation on campaign finance abuses, where huge amounts of money were going, but he just wanted to look at Democrats. And we said, fine, we should look at Democrats, where there was money that was coming into a campaign which had no place in the campaign. But here's a list of Republicans. We want you to add to the list. This is a bipartisan problem. There's too darn much money in politics. It's not just one party or the other. And he refused to do it. Thompson refused to call our witnesses, who were the supporters of the Republican Party. That destroyed the value of that hearing. That hearing could not have value because he was doing it for a partisan purpose.
Do you find there are more incentives or disincentives to approach things from a bipartisan way, especially, well, either when you started or today? Are there incentives to do it, or are there more disincentives from approaching things like that?
Well, there's always both. The incentive is, if you want to have an effect on public policy, it's going to have to be bipartisan, in-depth, honest, fact-based, fact-driven. You got to just go after the facts, whatever they are. Just go after them together, arm in arm. And then if you see things differently after you put together your investigation, fine. But at least do the facts together, look at the facts together. But there's also, obviously, the incentive is if you want to get something done. The disincentive is that at times you're stepping on toes of people who've supported you or friends. And it's not easy to do that, to go after a group, for instance, which has supported you. Let's say it's a particular type of a group of philanthropy, let's say, that's been very supportive of a cause that you believe in. Well, if that philanthropy is not behaved properly, abused tax laws or whatever it is, you've got to be willing to say, hey, you know what? You got to change your behavior. And if they don't, well, we may go to a public hearing on this issue. They may be part of a group that wants a special treatment from you because they've been supporting a cause you passionately believe in. But unless you are willing to hit some targets that are close to home, at least philosophically, it's not going to be credible.
And did you find that in that way, the bipartisan functioning, people on both sides willing to do that, of the Oversight and Government Management Committee contribute to the accomplishments of the subcommittee and to good public policy?
We did one of the early things we did at the that subcommittee that you mentioned, the Oversight of Government Managers. We took on Ed Meese. He was a counselor to the President of the United States. But he had done some bad things in terms of helping himself in that position, lobbying in the White House for friends of his to get contracts. And then those friends had friends who would help him financially by giving him opportunities to buy stock at the opening when the stock was first being offered. But the way they did it was that they offered him that stock a few minutes after it opened, when he knew whether or not the stock was going to go up or down. And it was like handing a high-level official money, because that's what it was. And we had a very strong hearing on it. Bill Cohen supported my determination to get White House records. The White House resisted it. White Houses resist legislative efforts to get documents all the time. And you've got to go arm in arm, because this is a check and balance issue. This is a legislative responsibility under the Constitution to do oversight. So we, arm in arm, told the White House that we wanted those documents. This was the Reagan White House at that time. And we finally were able to work it out so that we could see documents, which at the beginning, they refused us. And the only reason I think they probably were willing to do that is that a Republican, Bill Cohen, was willing to tell a Republican president, I'm with Levin on this.
Are there other hearings that stand out to you or efforts on oversight that stand out to you from your time in the Senate?
Well, some of the hearings involved some of the Wall Street shenanigans and the terrible activities on Wall Street, which preceded and led to the financial collapse in 2008. Some of their behavior, the self-dealing, the way in which they put their interest in the number of the banks ahead of their own clients' interest, lining their own pockets at the expense of their clients, which contributed not just to unfairness to their own clients, but directly contributed to the financial problems we had with bad mortgages that were put in the form of securities and then sold to pension funds by some of the big banks like Goldman Sachs. And we really went after them big time. But again, it was bipartisan. I had Republican support doing that. If I didn't, if whoever my colleague was at the time said, oh, that's just a Democrat going after some Republican target, it could have become a mess. Instead, it was a very bipartisan, very hard-hitting, very honest, and had a big policy effect because we were able to get some laws changed as a result of those hearings, almost directly as a result of those hearings when we got Dodd-Frank passed and we made it more difficult for banks to speculate.
Mm-hmm. And to do a lot of that oversight, a lot of it's about getting information, getting documents, whether it's from banks or from the White House. On the White House piece, on Congress's right to access documents where there's a claim of executive privilege. What are your thoughts on that? You talked a little bit about earlier how important it was to be able to get documents from the White House in particular. What about the claim of executive privilege or deliberative process?
Well, there is no claim which can supersede the right of Congress to get a document. The only claim that can be made is by a witness who takes the Fifth Amendment. That's a constitutional claim. But all White Houses resist, just about everyone I've ever seen, will resist turning over documents. And that's why you need a strong bipartisan Congress. That's the check and balance issue. White Houses don't like to give up documents if they can not give up documents, particularly ones which are politically embarrassing. It's kind of part of the process almost. It's endemic. It's systematic. Don't be surprised if a White House is trying to protect some embarrassing document. But yeah, that's why you have to insist on good oversight, which is bipartisan, and that's why the public needs to focus on the importance of oversight, but also if there are people who are abusing oversight for partisan purposes, they shouldn't get away with that either. And that's happened too much recently in the Republican House of Representatives. And I say that, I hope I know, it probably sounds partisan, but when the same committee has 20 hearings on the same subject and gets nowhere, over and over and over again, they're wasting the public's money.
What are the opportunities for oversight of oversight in that regard, where you see oversight being misused? What do the public or other leaders have? Where can they turn to conduct good oversight of?
Yeah, no easy answer. I guess the press, the media, the president. You know, the president also is a check on Congress. The president's got a bully pulpit. Mm-hmm. It's a powerful bully pulpit. And I think President Obama has, with some success, by the way, pointed out some of the abuses of the Oversight Committee, the Republican-dominated House. He's pointed that out. But this is all about checks and balances, and the media, and the public has a responsibility too, by the way. You know, people need to be involved. And those, some of these are technical issues, and people say, oh, they're all the same or whatever. Well, they're not all the same. There's important differences between public officials. Like everything else, we got some great ones, mediocre ones, bad ones. It's like any other group, and it's not a partisan issue.
Well, it's been wonderful to hear all these stories and lessons learned in your years in the Senate, and I'm proud that the Levin Center is going to be helping to train and lead the next generation of Senator Levins working to conduct good legislative oversight at every level. So with that, we'll take a break and pick up on our discussion of various issues involving legislative oversight in our next video. Thank you.